Hello, everyone. This is Al Gilbert, the Chief Listing Officer for AdvisoryOptions.net, with another edition of 15 Minutes of Fame. As you know, I love talking to interesting people, and my person of interest today is Mr. Gary Sostack, a friend of mine and former client. Gary is the current president of ElementaLogistics, a consulting service for corporations and third-party logistic providers to help them improve global logistics, supply chain, and transportation goals. Did I get that right, Gary?
Oh, you got it right. It's great to be with you and great seeing you.
Good seeing you again, too. Now, I met Gary as a sales rep for Carlson Wagonlit Travel when Gary was essentially the global travel manager for Aramco Services. And Gary, I was always impressed by your candid expertise, which reminded me of the quote from Guthrie, which is, "Any fool can make something complicated. It takes a genius to make it simple." And you always had that gift. So we turn to you today to help simplify the world of global supply chain, particularly as it relates to the COVID pandemic. And prior to COVID, I took the supply chain for granted. It was like electricity. It was just there. When I needed something, I assumed everything I needed would be on the shelf when I walked into the store. Before COVID, I looked upon UPS and other delivery people as just workers. Now I see them as military heroes. So my first question for you then is, did the supply chain providers have a contingency plan for a pandemic like COVID-19, or did we just simply dodge a bullet?
Yeah, well, Al, a little bit of both. No one could ever plan for a pandemic like this, I think is the first short answer. We had some dry runs and some serious dry runs, starting, of course, with the HIV/AIDS in the 80s, the middle 80s. There was that. The forerunner for the COVID-19 was the SARS and MERS epidemic, which took place in the Middle East and in Africa, and those were every bit as serious in those areas of the world as COVID is globally. So there was some dry runs in the pharmaceutical area to work on these, but really nothing prepares you for this. And one of the things about supply chain management and logistics is if you look in a corporation, it takes about, from the time a guy in a corporation has an idea in his head, he needs something, or the consumer needs something, all the way through to the end. There's about 7 or 8 steps. And if everybody does every one of those single steps, let's say at a 97% AQL, which nobody does, but let's just say it is, for example, 7 steps times 0.97 times 0.97 times 0.97 times 0.97. Well, by the time you get to the end of it, 22% of the material that is not delivered right, is wrong, is broken, is late. So it's inherent in the supply chain industry that we deal with failure. And so there's always has to be some sort of contingency plans that are in place. But there was a lot of FIO, figure it out, that took place when things started happening in March of last year or January of last year.
Did it help that most of the people in transportation and the logistics business were deemed essential workers and therefore were not restricted to their home?
Yeah, you're not going to get your pharmaceuticals to the hospitals, to the marketplaces, into the arms of people if you're not an essential worker. And if you didn't, so yes, I think that propelled things a little bit. But you have to say the incredible speed of the pharmaceutical industry, of the Modernas and the J&Js, et cetera, to get this product to market is fascinating. And because it got to market so fast, people like the FedEx division of their custom critical division, they had to respond, as did UPS, as did Amazon and everyone else. And they did. They put manpower out on the streets. They put trucks out, bodies, planes. Of course, they got compensated for it, and their quarterly earnings were reflecting that. But yeah, they were ready. Al, I believe you're muted.
Thank you. Yeah, with the exception of toilet paper, I think we were pretty lucky as consumers to have access to most things.
And interesting, what you're seeing now is as we began a stage where we're coming out of COVID. Of course, there's the variants now are slowing us back up, but there is a tremendous backlog of consumer demand. And therefore, let me just give you a great example. There were car makers that just quit making cars. And now there's this tremendous demand for cars. You can see the price reflects it, but not just the cars, but the parts, the spare parts. Here's a great just home example right at home. I had a dishwasher under warranty that needed to be repaired. The repair guy who came out had to come out 3 times because he only got one part at a time. The repair guy told me this is unprecedented, but they're waiting 6, 8, 9, 10 weeks for parts for the dishwasher. He said, my garage, I used to have a little corner over here with parts. Now my entire garage is full of spare parts waiting for the other additional parts to come. So we're seeing that kind of shortage at the moment on the
Right.
consumer side.
Yeah. So my question is, how is the COVID year changed the science of supply chain, and if is what you described for your dishwasher, is that going to be the new norm for the foreseeable future?
No, it's a blip. If the variant gets under control, and when the variant gets under control, you'll see there'll be a lagging indicator. You'll see probably a year down the road, all of this will flush out. The issues with the container ships, for example, that are all stacked up at the port of Los Angeles and the port of Houston will ease up. By the way, on the transportation side, there's an explosion of costs for ocean containers, 40-foot containers. Let me just give you a quick example as we're talking now. About 5 years ago, a 40-foot ocean container from China to Long Beach was about $3,500. They're going now for about $15,000 for a container.
And that cost is being passed on to the consumer, isn't it?
Absolutely. There is no way a steamship line or a freight forwarder is going to absorb that cost. So those are all things that are now happening on the demand side because of the pent-up need for this. We're going to probably see this all the way through Christmas. The Christmas season of goods is just now about to start, I would say, in September, where that material starts coming into the U.S. as well. Mm-hmm. So I think the first quarter, maybe the beginning of the second quarter next year, before all of this flushes out.
You mentioned in a previous meeting we had that you wish you were 25 again and getting into the supply chain logistics for the first time. What makes supply chain logistics exciting now that it wasn't not so exciting when you were younger?
Well, I've been in it for 30 years, and I think your early beginning comments bear this out. When I would go to a cocktail party 15, 20 years ago, and someone would say, "What do you do?" I say, "I'm in supply chain." They would go, "What's that?" Right? Now, everybody knows what supply chain is because of what happened with COVID, with the vaccines, et cetera. The explosion of things like artificial intelligence and algorithms, AI, these things we are now attracting in this industry more than just transportation people, truck drivers, air freight people, steamship line. They used to be called box kickers and label lickers.
Okay.
I'm a corporate fellow at the University of Houston downtown, and this summer I'm co-teaching with a tenured professor decision modeling, and in the supply chain. Now there really was no such course 3 years ago as decision modeling in the supply chain. But when you hear the buzzwords like smart contracts, immutable ledgers, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, I mean, some of the first places where all of these new things are getting initiated is in supply chain management. Tremendous career opportunities all the way around. We're gonna, who would have thought, and it's going to happen, not just in my lifetime, but in the next few years, we're going to have driverless trucks driving material, where we had truck driver shortages for many years. That's absolutely going to take place.
That's interesting. You're quite right, but I had not thought about the combination of supply chain and cryptocurrencies and blockchain. But It's going to be a big factor. So we can't talk about supply chain distribution without talking about Amazon. What is the Amazon magic of distribution?
Well, I liken what's happened in Amazon in the last 20 years to it's a disruptive technology along the lines of replacing the horse with an automobile, with the interstate highways that crisscrossed the nation in the 1950s, with things that took place then. You know, Amazon managed to take the transportation piece, the last mile that we've talked about. We talk about this number of elements, the last mile, the consumer piece of it, to be able to bring all of these vendors together under one roof, which is what they've done. And very interestingly, talk about something that no one ever talks about, and certainly is the reverse logistics. It's the unsexiest part of the business, meaning I don't like what I got, I want to send it back. Well, prior to Amazon, that was a tremendous thorn for almost all retailers, is the return of the goods. They tried to make it as seamless as possible for the consumer, and everybody felt the annoyance of it. Now it's totally seamless, and you get credited right away. So they're a game changer, complete game changer. You know, UPS 6-7 years ago didn't deliver on Sundays, full stop. Yeah. So you look at their Monday.
Yeah,
it's not the case anymore.
I agree with you. I became a dedicated Amazon client when I realized that that there's the beauty of it wasn't so much in what they did right, but how they handle things when things went wrong. I mean, as you say, it's effortless. I mean, they replace it, they take it back, they send you a second one. It's really the holy grail of customer service, I think. I want to ask you another question about, you reminded me, the difficulty you had with the dishwasher parts reminds me that basically all parts come from China. Do we simply have to accept the fact that all supply roads lead to China, or is there a way to make the supply chain less dependent upon China?
Okay, well, the short answer is anytime from now in this foreseeable future, those ships that I told you about that are full of containers from Shanghai and every other place into the west coast of the United States, and then now through the Panama Canal, now that they've widened the Panama Canal, that's still going to be an issue. That's still going to be how we're going to manage it. There is some repatriation of that's taking place right now that may continue. It's going to be incremental. It's not going to be, at least this is all my opinion and conjecture. Sure. But I think for the foreseeable future, most of what we're seeing is going to be either through China or through the countries around China, the Asian countries that have stepped up their manufacturing.
Yeah, I think you're right. And from my deck here in San Francisco Bay, I can see a lot of ships out there at anchor waiting for a place to unload. So talking about airlines, unlike my alma mater, Pan Am, over my shoulder, today's airlines were saved from bankruptcy from both by both federal government bailouts and an explosive growth in cargo traffic. Such explosive growth helped United Airlines beat second quarter expectations. United Airlines reported 105% increase in cargo gains to offset passenger business. Is passenger business more profitable than cargo, or the other way around?
Well, cargo pre-pandemic, cargo traffic for the U.S. carriers, the big four, represented probably less than 5% of their revenue, 5 or 6%, even though the American carriers got out of the freighter business for a long time ago. Mm-hmm. So where 105% jump from United Airlines is a jump from a small number. Right. So the percentage of revenue may have climbed, and I haven't seen the annual report, to 8 or 9% of total revenue, but still, I mean, the bodies in the seats upstairs are still where the money's made for the passenger carriers. Now that's not always been the case with the international carriers. You know, the Emirates and the KLMs and the Singapore, Japan Airlines, Air France's, they ran and have run robust up until a number of years ago freighter operations. But even that's starting to diminish a little bit. The passenger traffic is where it's at for them. And so the names that most people have never heard of have taken the lion's share of that business now. The Atlas Airs and so forth.
Because they focus on cargo and they've got the space. Choke points. We talk about choke points in the supply chain. Perhaps the most visible reminder of a choke point is the image of the enormous container ship stuck in the Suez Canal for a week. What other choke points should we be aware of in the supply chain?
Well, we have a West Coast choke point as well. Always the Port of Long Beach. Port of Long Beach is the busiest container terminal in the United States, and depending on which number you look at, it's the biggest container terminal in the world. So infrastructure at the ports and at the rail yards. Remember, all the containers get into Long Beach, but then, you know, not everybody lives in California that gets the goods. The goods get transshipped all over the United States. I mean, to the West Coast, from the West Coast, mostly by rail. If you can afford it, you have it by truck, and the trucking industry's robust. But the rail traffic, and there's only so many rail cars and so many rails, and so there's a choke point. Right now, the rail industry is really constrained on what's going on with the explosion of the consumer goods. Now everybody wants to buy stuff after and I think we're going to see that with the Christmas season coming up.
Yeah. Speaking of railroads and such, do you think, or are you hopeful that the federal government's proposed plan for proposed investment in infrastructure will help the supply chain at all?
Sure. Oh, yeah. If you know the tens of thousands of bridges in the United States that need repair. I saw a statistic recently that a majority, not a plurality, but a majority of the bridges in the United States are 50 years old or older. That is a real concern. So we're having a big fight here in Houston, or about to have a big fight about the widening of I-45, Interstate 45, which is the major north-south freeway to get things from South Texas up through the middle part of the United States. So the money that's going to get freed up for infrastructure is going to be big. Now, on the rail side, if you're thinking it's going to help on the passenger rail side, that's another story. The common belief is, well, Europe has a great rail system, passenger rail system, and Asia, China has a great rail system, and why can't we get that together here in the U.S.? Well, the fact of the matter is, yeah, they do in Europe, but none of them make money. Every rail system is subsidized by the government in one way, shape, or form, and there has to be an appetite for that on the U.S. level, but there hasn't been thus far. So that's another choke point, but that's a political one. Yeah,
well, that's it. There are political choke points and physical choke points. I think the political ones outnumber the physical 100 to 1. So last question. Recent surveys indicate that over half of the companies that have allowed flexible or hybrid work at home are expecting people to come back, and people are resisting that. How is that going to affect the supply chain, if it is at all? You mentioned some in the beginning, maybe driverless trucks and whatnot, but.
Well, I tell you what, I mentioned what a great opportunity would be to be 25 and be to start my career in supply chain again. I wouldn't want to start my career in commercial real estate.
Yeah.
I think this is what's happened is historical and is going to have legs, and people are going to go back to work in offices, but not everybody's going to go back to work in offices. If the shortage of employees qualified employees continue, then there's going to be a shift. And so much more work now can be done because of automation from anywhere, that will have an effect. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say 5 years from now, part of a compensation package is going to include your electricity and your air conditioning bill and your other things, so that you don't have to, which a company who normally used to have 4 floors in an office building in a downtown city maybe only needs 1 floor. So those are the kinds of things that I think are going to take place. And that all has tremendous infrastructure needs. Do we really need, if the downtown areas shrink by 10 or 15%, how many more trucks, buses are we going to need? So those are things that policymakers and employers are going to have to figure out moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I could talk to you all day, Gary, but we've used up your 15 minutes of fame. And I appreciate your time. We've been talking with Gary Sostack, current president of ElementaLogistics. And if you have any questions, want to know more about the expertise that he does, please look him up on LinkedIn. Gary, I appreciate your time, your expertise as always. You've simplified a complicated subject for all of us, and that's great.
Well, Al, it's great to be with you and great seeing you. Hope to see you again soon.
You will. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.